I feel like over the past year, I've kind of stumbled upon some books that I normally wouldn't read, but by some wonderful twist of fate, I ended up enjoying quite a bit. I couldn't justify doing a big dedicated review for each book because there is so many of them. So I just decided to compile them into one big, quickish recommendations video. Let me know in the comments if you guys like this style of review or recommendation video, and I'll definitely be happy to do more of them. So some of these hidden gems are fantasy, some are not. It's about half and half. Actually, it's exactly half and half because I added one more fantasy book to make it so, because I'm just neurotic like that, I guess. And I'm not even sure if I'm using that word correctly. But anyways, on to the recommendations. The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. I'm going to read the actual back of the book description here just because I don't want to accidentally spoil anything for you guys. There's a lot of twists and turns in this book, and I want to make sure that I give you guys the same experience that I got. So in a boarded up house on a dead-end street at the edge of the wild Washington woods lives a family of three: a teenage girl who isn't allowed outside, not after last time, a man who drinks alone in front of his TV trying to ignore the gaps in his memory, and a house cat who loves napping and reading the Bible. An unspeakable secret binds them together, but when a new neighbor moves in next door, what is buried out among the birch trees may come back to haunt them all. Now, as you can probably tell by the description, this is not a fantasy book. This is our first kind of thriller suspense book on the list. And this was a hell of a mind bender. There was twist after twist after twist, and by the end, I felt like my brain had been pulled out surgically, scrambled, and then reconnected. It plays a lot with your perception of events and timelines and stuff like that, and there is absolutely no way that you could guess the ending to this book, but when you get there, it makes perfect sense, and you're like, how did I not see that the whole time? I think she pulled this off absolutely flawlessly. It was definitely one of my favorite books from 2021, and I'm really, really eager to not only reread this one, but the rest of her back catalog. Then we have Carrion Comfort by Dan Simmons. This book follows three mind vampires in fairly modern day. I think it was back in the 40s is when this kind of starts, and then it gradually gets closer and closer to modern day. And it also follows the humans who have been affected by these mind vampires. The humans quickly get swept up in the vampire war games and try to turn the hunters into the hunted. So basically, these vampires in this book are not your typical vampires. They are humans with the ability to live forever given certain circumstances, but also they can control human minds just by telepathically thinking at them. I forget what the actual timeline is. I think it's once every 100 years or something like that. They get together and they try to control as many humans as they can and pit them against each other. So they kind of have these war games between the three vampires. And it gets really interesting when some of the humans are clued in as to what's going on, because usually they're not. And so the humans start to fight back and they start to make plans of their own. Really, really good book, but it is a long book. It is a super, super long book. It does interesting things exploring the mind of someone who has absolute power, and that would be obviously the vampires. And the way I described it before was, no matter what kind of person you think you are, imagine if you had complete power to control someone's mind, anyone's mind. Like after, at first you may use that for good if you even can, but after a while, what would you become after 3 or 4 or 500 years of having this absolute power over people? Would you really be that good of a person in the end? I don't really know. And it kind of explores the idea of that. And you have most of the vampires are absolutely terrible people, and then you have one of them who's not a good person, but not as bad as the others. And so it plays with the idea of, can you be this morally gray mind bender and, you know, still come out the other end? I thought it was really interesting. I think you guys would really like it. But don't read it if you're squeamish about absolutely terrible things happening to innocent people. There are some really gnarly things that happen to people in this book, including, you know, the R word. I can't say it on YouTube because of the algorithm, but just murder and all sorts of stuff and torture. It gets really bad. So you have to have a really strong stomach to make it through this book, and make sure that you have a solid block of time on your hands, because this is a 50-hour audiobook. That's right, a 50-hour audiobook. It took forever to get through this, even at my reading speed. Okay, I promise we'll get to the actual fantasy books on this list, and this is somewhere in the middle, but this is The Troupe by Robert Jackson Bennet. He's also the author of the Foundry Side trilogy. This one, without a doubt, is the hardest to describe, and Gabe read it recently too, and he's like, I don't know how I would describe this book to someone, just because the story starts pretty early on, but you can't spoil it because it is kind of a twist, and it kind of follows that rabbit trail all the way through. So I gotta start with the very basics, kind of the back of the book stuff. It's about a boy who goes looking for his father, who is a part of a traveling music troupe. In the first couple chapters, he finds and joins this troupe, but quickly learns that there is a lot more going on behind the scenes than he initially thought. And even though it's set on Earth in most likely the early 1900s, there's a lot of supernatural elements that grow into a large-scale conflict that feels really existential. It feels very like end of the world, but it never becomes this big epic fantasy. I described it as a small story with large consequences. It also has one of the most beautiful endings I've ever read, with a really fantastic twist, and it made both Gabe and I cry at the end, which is rare for him, honestly. Then we have Dark Oak, a dark fantasy written by Jacob Sannox. And first we need a little bit of world building information here. Some demonic forces took over this world before the story begins and turns a lot of the human villages into slave soldiers and armies by threatening to burn the village if they don't comply. As the story starts, we see these demonic entities get defeated, and the rest of the story is kind of what happens afterward. How does humanity rebuild, and how does nature reclaim what was lost? If I remember correctly, there is 3 or 4 main characters we follow. One is a queen trying to redefine the boundaries of her kingdom and move the right people into power. One is a woodsman who is fighting for the demons and is now fighting for the kingdom, but is trying to get back to his family that he left behind in said village. One is his wife, who is housing a strange band of pirates, and one is a military leader who inscripts the service of the woodman and his soldiers. There's a lot of really fantastic action, a lot of really good character arcs, and just kind of political intrigue. One of the most devastating twists of fate that I've read in a book lately happens near the end, and it was absolutely gut-wrenching. The ending took some figuring out. There's a lot of magic related stuff that kind of gets puzzled out at the end, and you really have to pay attention to what exactly is going on, and it can take some rereading to get a handle on it all, or at least it did for me, but I'm definitely eager to check out the rest of the trilogy and see kind of what happens in the end. Then we have To Dust You Shall Return by Fred Venturini. It follows a disillusioned mafia bruiser who has left the criminal life behind to go searching for his missing girlfriend, which leads him to a small, strange town where nothing is quite what it seems. It has a fantastic mystery plot that will keep you guessing, and a couple really fantastic characters that have great arcs that you're absolutely rooting for by the end. Really, really solid ending that was more than satisfying, while also leaving it somewhat open for sequels if he ever decides to do one, but I'm pretty sure that this is a standalone. Highly recommended for fans of Stephen King or Dean Koontz. Really, really solid book all around. Then we have Shadow Prowler, which is the first book in the Chronicles of Ciala, written by Alexey Pehov. It's been a while since I read this one, so I'm just going to read you guys the description here. An army is gathering. Thousands of giants, ogres, and other creatures are joining forces from all across the desolate lands, united for the first time in history under one black banner. By the spring, or perhaps sooner, the Nameless One and his forces will be at the walls of the great city of Avendoon, unless Shadow Herald, Master Thief, can find some way to stop them. Epic fantasy at its best, Shadow Prowler is the first in a trilogy that follows Shadow Herald, the legendary thief of Ciala, on his quest for a magic horn that will restore peace to the kingdom of Ciala. Harold will be accompanied on his quest by an elfin princess, Marilissa, her elfin escort, and 10 wild hearts, the most experienced and dangerous fighters in their world, and by the King's Court Jester, who may be more than he seems, or less. So, I typically don't enjoy classic quest fantasy, and those parts were indeed my least favorite parts of the book, but that is purely a subjective taste thing. I think this book was written really well, and it was really interesting to see the combination of the kind of dark fantasy / grimdark rogue character mixed in with the brighter classic fantasy tropes. Like, when do you ever get to see the big epic battle for the kingdom kind of book from the thief's perspective? It's a pretty rare thing. Shadow Herald is a fantastic character, and he would often kind of talk to the reader directly, breaking the fourth wall a bit in his head, and had a lot of really fun inner dialogue. You also get to see him plan the infiltration and do all his sneaky acrobatics and thievery, as well as kind of his dark side of the street connections and whatnot. This really reminded me of the Fallen Blade series, which is one of my favorite series of all time. It didn't quite have the same grim dark feel, I guess, but it was really, the character was really similar. I really enjoyed this one. Lately, I've been thinking about doing a reread of it and going on to the second book in the series, because I really enjoyed the main character. He was really the thing that carried this whole book for me, I think. Then we have Web of Eyes by Rhett, Bruno, and Jaime Castle. This is one I almost made a dedicated review for because I loved it so much, but it really is the definition of a Hidden Gems series. The first book is almost like one of those comedy movies that were popular a few years ago, where two people who are polar opposites have to go on like a road trip together or something to achieve some sort of common goal. We follow renowned thief Whitney Firestone and the Queen's royal protector Torsten Unger for the first book, and basically Whitney has found himself in prison, and Torsten is to set off on a quest to go get the magical MacGuffin for the book to heal the prince of his affliction, but he needs Whitney's skills as a thief to get the item back. He releases Whitney from prison with the stipulation that he will help Torsten on his quest. They hit the road, and honestly, hilarity ensues. It's such a good journey, as well as some really heartwarming moments. There's really good moments between these two characters as they, I guess, kind of become friends. Like, you'll have to read and find out, but I really liked the humor in this book. Like I said, I really liked the first book for its comedy, but the rest of the series was able to keep that humor while also upping the stakes exponentially with each book and making it a much more focused, serious series. Whitney and Sora the Elf are one of my favorite friends to lovers storylines ever, as well as the enemies to friends storyline of Whitney and Torsten. and how the rest of the characters develop is so good, especially Torsten's personal growth. I cannot recommend this series enough. It's 6 books long and every single one is worth it. The audiobook narrator is absolutely phenomenal. Luke Daniels, he did books like the Iron Druid series, and I loved his voices for all the characters, especially Whitney. If you need a fun and lighthearted fantasy series with a bit of humor, but also increasing stakes with each book, you do not want to miss this series. It's probably one of my highest recommends on this list. All right, then we have Soul Survivor by Dean Koontz. This is one of my top 5 favorite single books of all time. Joe Carpenter is dealing with the wreckage that is his life after his wife and his 2 daughters died during a plane crash. After being visited by someone who says they were aboard the plane and survived, he starts to have hope and find purpose again while uncovering a twisting, winding conspiracy of the crash of Flight 353. This story has it all. Mystery, a little bit of horror. This book actually has one of the scariest scenes I've ever read that is just stuck in my head forever. It has a man working to rebuild himself after being absolutely shattered, and a great showing of what a man will do for his family even after they're gone. This book tugs at me in so many ways. There's so many reasons to love this book, not the least of which is the main character himself, but you will be on the edge of your seat the whole way and will not guess the big twist at the end. Like I said, this is one of my favorite books of all time. I don't know what else to say about it. It has such a good mystery that kept me guessing the whole way through, and there are certain scenes, like there are certain set pieces when I think back on this book that I can picture so vividly. There's like 5 of them throughout the book, and each one is so unique, and there's such a emotional feeling tied to it based on what's happening in the story at that moment. And I just loved Joe Carpenter and his almost obsessive need to uncover the mystery of what happened to his family. And it just shows how dedicated he is, even though it is kind of obsessive at certain points. You know, it really shows how much he truly loved his family and how much he still wants to do right by them. Then we have Lowtown by Daniel Polansky. This book was really awesome, and I keep meaning to read the sequel, but I may need a reread of the first one at this point. The story follows a man known as Warden, who is an intelligence agent that left the secret police force known as Black House in this kind of urban fantasy setting, set back in maybe probably like the 1800s or something. I think it's right on that brink of like guns are there, but it's not quite modern. So wherever that is, like super late Victorian kind of steampunk era. But being disgraced as he is, he finds himself using the drugs that he sells on the mean streets of Lowtown, a dirty, grimdark slum where good people are few and far between. When Warden finds a dead child on one of his drug peddling routes, however, he sets off on a mission to find out who is doing this to the children in his neighborhood, and he may not like what he finds. I really enjoyed this book because it's pretty rare that we get a protagonist who is a drug user and drug dealer. We actively see him moving his wares throughout the book as well as using them. The world is really cool as well. You feel like you're walking with him through the nasty and dangerous streets of Lowtown. Not to mention it has a really fantastic twist ending that I did not see coming until it was too late. Definitely a high recommend from me. Netherwell Horror by Lee Mountford follows a woman looking for her brother who calls from a payphone in the seaside town of Netherwell Bay. When she gets there, however, she realizes the locals are definitely keeping secrets from her and want her to leave. She embarks on a mind-splitting and terrifying quest to root out the evils of Netherwell Bay and find her lost brother, who may be in more trouble every day that she delays. This is very heavily influenced by H.P. Lovecraft. I loved the dark and mysterious town of Netherwell Bay, and there is some really, really haunting imagery that will wiggle its way into your dreams like the tentacles of our Lord and Savior Cthulhu himself. It was a pretty quick read. I don't know what to say about it really. It's just kind of a thriller mystery, very Lovecraftian, kind of set in this seaside town where this whole thing is taking place. There's some cult activity and missing brother. I mean, you guys get it. What else could you ask for in a story like this? I found this story when I was going through kind of a Lovecraftian phase. I had been playing Fallout and I got to the Lovecraftian DLC that they had in that game, and I just needed more of that. And so I went looking and found this one, and I really, really liked it. There is some really horrific things that happen in it, but I thought that the mystery was really good, and it was my first real experience with like big cosmic horror, like really scary Cthulhu type stuff. Then we have Oathbreaker by A.J. Rettger, one of my favorite grimdark reads of 2021. It follows Mario Deschamps, a guy who is training to be a knight, and when he gets sent out on his first quest, he realizes that being a knight is not always saving princesses from dragons, or even about doing the right thing most of the time. This is his... Jeez, why can't I say that? This is his journey of becoming disillusioned and seeing more of war than he can handle. I really love this book for many reasons. I think it is the perfect grimdark story that has themes about loss of innocence, having to cross lines you never thought you would, betrayal, and kind of the dangers and depravity of the world. We really see Mario start as this bright and shining pupil, but little by little throughout the book, he is forced to do things he would have never considered doing, and it absolutely breaks him by the end. One of the few things keeping him held together are his friends that he travels with, as well as a special someone by his side. I really liked how the grimdark elements were both there in the forefront, but also subtle enough that they felt real and considered. It's not trying too hard to be edgy and dark, but it's more about the realities of this world that AJ has created. There's tons of fantastic action and political intrigue, and the audiobook narrator did a really, really good job. I cannot wait for the sequel to this book. I'm so excited for it. Last one on this list, we have The Lost War by Justin Lee Anderson. This one is one that I just read. It won either Spiffbo 6 or Spiffbo 7. Maybe Editing Spencer will put it in there. But it won the whole competition. And it follows a druid, aka a mage in this world, who is the king's envoy, meaning he goes and does various high and low profile missions for the king to further secure his kingdom. He's set out on a mission from the king, so he gathers some companions to travel with, but along the way their mission changes drastically as they uncover a deeper mystery in the land of Eden. I really liked this book. Aronach, the main character, was fantastic, and I really enjoyed the magic system at play. The magic system takes a long time to get explained properly, but once it does, you can see exactly how cool it is. I soon fell in love with all the side characters as well, and everything that's going on in the kingdom was really, actually fascinating and interesting. Which is cool because I'm not usually one who pays attention to that stuff very much, like the outer workings of the kingdoms in these fantasy books. This one really hooked me. So you guys know that I love twist endings, like twists along the way, whatever. But there was one pretty big problem I had with this book, and that was there was a big M. Night Shyamalan twist ending that I don't think was foreshadowed enough in the book itself. It felt like it came way out of left field, and I was really happy with the storyline we already had. The twist changed quite a lot of things, and I think that it will be up to the sequel to make me decide if it's a good or bad thing. I think the twist was a really cool idea, but just executed poorly. However, that didn't change my enjoyment of the book that much. I still had a fantastic time with this story and these characters, and I will definitely read it again and read the sequel when it's released. Also, the audiobook narrator was really, really fantastic. This is another high recommend from me. I think you guys will really enjoy it as long as you go in knowing that there's kind of a twist at the end that comes a bit out of left field. And there you have it, guys. That is my list of hidden gems that I've stumbled onto over the past year or so. I'll have a link to each one in order down below in the description if you'd like to check them out. I did the audiobooks for all of these, and I can definitely say they were all fantastic. What are some books that you love that don't get enough recognition? I'm always looking for books like that. I feel like there's so many great books that just fly under the radar, like King's Dark Tidings series by Kelcade. I had no idea what those were until I just kind of stumbled onto them. So please let me know what your favorites are in the comments below, or reach out to us on Twitter or Discord, linked in the description. I'd love to do more of these kind of reviews in the future. If you guys enjoyed this video, then leave a like and hit the subscribe button if you're not already. And we'll see you next time on the Fantasy Files podcast.